Welcome to Discovering More. We're talking about our history, how, as you said, Mark, we are our history, but not just our history.
That's right. You know, I really hadn't, before I did a Post-it Note timeline, I don't know that I thought much about all this.
Now, real quick, I know people familiar with Peace know what a Post-it Note timeline is, but brief sketch is basically taking this system that's been created, you look online, Post-it Note timeline, and going through your history and making notes of those pivotal moments, right?
Right. And the guy that taught this, for me for the first time, Terry Walling, he talked about his own family. And I think that his, whatever it was, great-great-great-grandmother or something like that, was the first woman to ever address Congress.
Wow.
And how that sort of accomplishment and influence, I guess, in the political realm, how that has sort of resonated over the generations within his family. And I don't know any of that within my own family tree. I haven't researched it enough, and none of those stories have come down. But I do know that within the Schultz side of my family, that there's a pretty long heritage of faith, you know, and commitment to Christ. Lutherans coming out of Germany mostly, and you know that, you know, I think that even if you're not aware of it or you're not thinking about it, I think that resonates down in kind of what your family traditions are.
Yeah. So kind of the stories that become part of what make up the life of your family. I think of both of my grandparents being farmers, you know, and my dad himself, he was a district attorney, but he couldn't get off the farm. You know, we lived out in the country, and he would be tooling around on a tractor, you know, doing something as a hobby, probably as a way to just, I don't know, connect with the history, right? So being outside, being outdoors, working with my hands, it's a big part of life.
Yeah.
So I can resonate with that. Yeah. One of the things from your sermon that I mentioned to you after one of our services was just, you were talking about Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. He said, by God's grace, I am what I am. And it really made me think, as he said, I don't even deserve to be called an apostle. If for the first time, I made this connection between Paul and Judas and how they both had this opportunity, right? Because Judas betrayed Jesus. Peter betrayed Christians. He betrayed Jesus' body, the church. I mean, fundamentally, there's not too much of a difference here. Judas makes this decision to end his life because of the guilt he's living with. Paul comes to terms with what he's done in the past and moves forward stronger because of it. You know, did Judas need to end his life? I mean, could Judas have been restored just as Peter was?
Absolutely, just as Paul was.
Right, and just as Paul was too?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it just gave me this interesting foil to say, like, we can have two people with the very, very similar histories making two very different outcomes with them. And you see children of alcoholics, like my grandfather was the son of an alcoholic, and he wasn't a teetotaler, but pretty darn close. You know, so you have these, like, what's my history going to be? You know, like, how am I going to move forward out of my history?
Right. Yeah, and there's, you know, I'm convinced that there's genetic components of some of these things anyway, that, you know, we inherit that heritage as well as maybe more of a cultural family heritage, and you know, and that may cause issues for us, not only physically, but there may be, I'm convinced that there's some certain aspects of sin anyway that are genetic. And we wrestle with those then. And there will be challenges for us, and so that's where we really need God's help in order to walk in a way that kind of minimizes those sin tendencies.
And maybe to pay attention to our history.
Oh, yeah.
Even Paul being a zealot for the law, you see him radically accept the gospel, but I'm sure he was very tempted to go back into those the law paradigms. But he was the one who's like, you know, we shouldn't expect Gentiles to become Jews. We cannot demand that the circumcision is something that is, you know, universal in the church, for instance, or things like this. And he was the one. He's like, you know, I've been there. I've seen it.
Yeah.
I know my history. It's the wrong way to go.
Right.
So for people today, I think coming to terms with our history is a big part of it, but we're not limited by our history. We're not. It's part of our story, and I think it was cool that in our if you didn't watch the sermon, go back and watch it. Abby on staff here, she shared part of her own story, which I think it can be helpful for us, and that's the beauty of all of us having our own story, that we get to share how God has redeemed us and how God has worked in our past and how God continues to work through our past to bring us into more hope for the future. God will redeem. God doesn't leave anything hanging. God redeems all things. That's some of the powerful parts of the biblical story, is that the little details, they don't get lost on God.
Right. Yeah, and that was one of the things that Terry Walling was really big on, and to some degree I still wrestle with it, is that, God doesn't waste anything. And I think, well, I don't think that God had any hand in that at all. But that even if it's not from God directly, that he redeems it, or that he utilizes it in a way that helps us as individuals grow. And what Terry Walling calls us all, getting a sovereign perspective, that God's sovereignty reigns in our lives. And that's not always evident to me.
Yeah.
But I think that a post-it note timeline exercise can move you in that direction. And by the way, coming up, what is it? It's the second Thursday in April. So the Thursday after Easter, going to do a post-it note timeline group exercise here, and then the materials or the instructions are also available online. And from the other side of the camera, where can we find that?
We'll link them in the description of the video.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, you might be hearing some background noise. We're having some work done on the outside of our building, which also, it's not just individual, but also institutional. I think Peace has a history as well, and that's one of the cool parts about where we are right now in our journey as a congregation. To be able to look back over 40 years of ministry, I've been looking back to some documents, and you had some good things to say even 40 years ago, right?
Occasionally, anyway.
And so, but you think about the legacy of leadership as well, and the history that helps shape how we move forward too. So it's a cool season. So anyway, make sure to find the Post-it Note timeline, sign up for Pastor Mark's walk through the Post-it Note timeline, and take some moment to think about how God will redeem your history too.